And today we're going to be exploring a lot more about cancer, which I know is a very uplifting topic. But again, this is the second leading cause of death in the US and the world. And so something I want to spend a little bit of time on. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to take a moment to review the homework that was due today, specifically the activity on Flipgrid. And I'm seeing lots of posts to both the hard activity and the introduce yourself, so that's great. Flipgrid isn't working for you. Again, you can always email me your videos, and some of you have done that. And then you also had the case study. So for the case study in particular, were there any questions about that, about Jim and Nancy and their various health problems? I'm curious, before you learned about all this, how many of you knew that essentially heart attack symptoms were different between males and females? Some of you knew about it? Cool. All right. I honestly had no idea. And so it was kind of eye opening for me, even just reading through the case study and seeing kind of what they were getting at there. But that was kind of the main takeaway was that even though Nancy seemed to be kind of having these weird symptoms and they kept pushing them off, and it was only bad when she was exercising and then she recovered, it was definitely a sign that she was having coronary artery disease, probably leading to a potential heart attack, even though it was a little bit different. So, all right. No one needs help on any of that? Okay, then heart disease is done. We're going to move on to do a little bit of cancer stuff. I wanted to try to touch on collages, but honestly, in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we get going on because there's a lot I do want to try to cover today. So we're going to go ahead and move on to task number 3 there, which is a KWL. There's 2 things I want you to do. First, if you click on the link to the cancer KWL table, that's what you know, what you want to know, and what you've learned. I'd like you to take a moment to, and you should be able to edit it, take a moment to fill in the first 2 columns. What do you know about cancer, and what do you want to learn about cancer? And it's okay, you can ask questions, like you can just post a question under what you want to learn. Try to keep things concise, because we're all typing in the same table. You'll finish the learned column later for homework after we've gone through the lesson. Once we have that done, there's a survey. This is the second thing you need to do. And it's basically 10 true or false questions about cancer. You don't need to look up anything. This isn't graded. I just want to see where we stand on our understanding of a couple things about cancer. And then I'm going to go through these true false questions to kind of guide us in our lesson today. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work on number 3 there, the first and the second tasks, which is the KWL table and the cancer survey. I'll be here listening if you need help on any of it. Go for it. Okay, I need verbal confirmation. Is everyone seeing the decoding cancer slide in front of them?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, try to go through this relatively quickly here. Okay, so these are not slides that were made by me. This is actually provided online. It's supposed to be a 2-day lesson, but I kind of cut a few things out just to keep it a little bit shorter and more concise. But we're going to talk about various misconceptions. That's why we're doing the true-false activity. You'll do a little comparison of the appearance and structure of cancer cells, and then we'll do a little activity about how cancer develops. So you just answered all these true-false questions, so let's go ahead and look at question 1. 70% of you said that this first one was true, right? The risk of dying from cancer in the United States is increasing, and this image is actually deceiving because the actual answer is false. The risk of dying from cancer in the United States has decreased from 1975 to 2012, mostly because of preventative measures. There's definitely certain habits like smoking that are becoming less common that were very tied to common forms of cancer, lung cancer in particular. But also our treatment is getting a lot better, right? So people who are diagnosed with cancer are dying from it less often. Here are some statistics about breast cancer in particular. This is what threatens a lot of women the most. What's interesting is, according to this table, do males get breast cancer?
Yes.
They do. It's very rare, though. I mean, look at the difference between males and females. Pretty drastic. But it does occur in males. There is a certain gene that it can be related to. But as you can see here, from 1975 to this study was done in 2012, a decent decrease in numbers. Now, it hasn't been eliminated. Breast cancer is still the #2 leading cause of death by cancer amongst women. Lung cancer is in the lead. But the numbers are going down, and so that's promising. And so I don't know if this trend has continued to 2020. That would be interesting to look up. Again, this is death rates per 100,000 people. So still too high for some females, though. Question 2 is cancer can be spread from person to person. 92% of you said this was false, and that is true. You're not going to, give it off like you would some other disease, like an infectious disease. However, it could be genetic, which means that while you're not handing it off to a person by touching them or anything, if it's genetic, who could you give it to?
Your kids?
Yep, your offspring or future relatives, right? And so that's something to be considered. There are also some contagious diseases that have been known to cause cancer, right? HPV, human papillomavirus, these are both actually infections of the sexual organs. It is closely tied with cervical cancer, and hepatitis C has been found to be associated with liver cancer. Question 3 was what someone does as a young adult has little effect on the chance of getting cancer later in life. 84% of you said that this was false, and that's good. That is indeed false. Most cases of cancer are a consequence of many years of exposure to several risk factors. There's certain foods that we eat that can drive that up, especially the chemicals that are now in foods, like preservatives, have been tied to that of being carcinogenic. This picture is showing you a sunburn, so UV light exposure can be really bad. Smoking has been directly tied to lung cancer, even though companies continue to still deny it. That's why you see the labels on cigarette packets. Radon in your homes. Radon is kind of scary, but it's a uranium derivative that just comes out of the ground and can accumulate in your basement. It's actually the second leading cause of lung cancer, second to smoking. And then just work environments. There are some people who, especially if you're a doctor or you work in a hospital, you're around MRIs and X-rays and machines that are generating a lot of radiation that has been tied to causing cancer. Also working in places like mines and stuff like that can be pretty, increase your risk of developing lung cancers and various things like that. So question 4, there's currently a cure for cancer, but the medical industry won't tell the public about it because they make too much money treating cancer patients. 93% of you said this was false, and that is accurate. The main falsehood of there is that there actually are some cures. There are certain types of cancer that we do have some pretty effective treatments for. And there are plenty of doctors who are also dying of cancer. So, I mean, again, this is kind of a conspiracy theory. The sheer number of people who would have to keep a secret like that, like a cure for a type of cancer, is unrealistic. There aren't really any vaccines or anything, right, that we've come up with for anything like that. But it's more just preventative measures by altering your behavior. Treating cancer with surgery can cause it to spread throughout the body. Again, this is a very common misconception. 85% of you said this was false, and that is indeed the case. The whole point of surgery is they'll usually do radiation exposure beforehand. So the goal of exposing you to radiation is to shrink the tumor down to a reasonable size so that they're not having to remove a lot of tissue. And then when they go in for surgery, they're usually removing those tumors, which is those growths of cancerous cells. That's what's really damaging, is when you have this growth in an organ and it's preventing the organ from functioning properly, whether it's your brain, your pancreas, your lungs. But it can be removed and is pretty effective. And then they'll follow up with more radiation treatment to kill any cancer cells they might have missed. But it definitely doesn't contribute to the spread. Cancer can be effectively treated. 85% of you said this was true, and that is the case. There are 5 major types of treatment. Surgery, as I discussed, where they literally go in and cut out the cancer cells. Radiation exposure, which just kills a lot of the cancer cells. They're pretty weak because they're reproducing so quickly, and that can shrink down the size of tumors. Chemotherapy. Does anyone know, when you have chemotherapy, you're injecting yourself with what? Does anyone know essentially what chemotherapy is? Would you say it's good for you or bad for you?
Isn't it like poison?
Yeah, it's essentially a poison that kills rapidly producing cells. So it'll kill off cancer cells, but it also kills off your hair follicles, which is why people on chemo lose their hair, fingernails. They're nauseous all the time because their stomach lining isn't replacing itself properly. So chemo is really only meant to be used in short terms, right? There's a certain amount of time you'll go through chemo and then you'll stop to let your body recover. But it has been effective against cancers, but it's not the easiest treatment to go through. Biological therapy. So again, this is like altering your diet, altering your behavior, getting more active. They've found that this is actually very effective, often just removing the cause that was contributing to your bad health before. And then different therapies as well. There's a bunch of homeopathic things that have been researched now to prove to be effective. But what I think is interesting is that fewer than half of all people with cancer in the US now are actually dying of the disease, which I think is a promising sign. And hopefully, again, treatment will continue to lower that number even more. Part 7 was cancer is a group of over 100 diseases. 85% of you, no, 78% of you said this was true, and that is the case. There are a bunch of different types of cancers, but the ones you'll hear about a lot are carcinomas, which is surface layer cancers, right? Skin cancer, that kind of thing. Sarcomas is in the connective tissue, so that's everything from muscle to bone. Leukemia is in your blood and in your bone marrow. Lymphomas and myelinomas, if you hear that word lymph, that's the immune system and in your lymph nodes. And then central nervous system cancers, like in the brain and the spine. Brain cancer in particular is not a good diagnosis to receive, but it comes in various forms, and there's different treatments and therapies for all of those. Number 8, cancer cells can be distinguished from normal cells because of their abnormal growth. This is an interesting one where 100% of you went with true, and that is the case. And there's a really good effective way of screening. This is why they do biopsies, where if there's some kind of lump or something that seems suspicious, they'll take just a few cells out of it and look at them, and you can literally visually see cancer cells. And we'll do a little comparison right after this. Okay, second to last one, cancer can only occur in specific cells in the body. A little torn here. 71% of you said this was false, and that is the case, right? This is one reason why there is no cure for cancer, because it's a failure in a control mechanism that is in every single cell in our bodies. Cancer can develop anywhere, anytime. It's very hard to manage, and if it spreads in particular and gets into your body, then it gets out of control. So it can develop in any cell. Last one was cancer develops because of abnormal gene function. And again, you were torn here. About 50% said true, 50% said false. And so it is actually true. The main driving factor behind cancer and why cells start to divide out of control, right? Tumors is uncontrolled cell growth, is because of a failure in control mechanisms that are governed by our genes, right? So there's 2 genes in particular we're going to look at today that if they don't work, will lead to cancer and tumor growth. So, obviously exposure to things like tobacco, UV light we mentioned earlier, those are the things that can mutate these genes, right? We call them carcinogens. That then can lead to that. So, all right. Any questions on that? I want to get us to our next activity. So let's go ahead and compare healthy cells and cancerous cells. Now here are images under a microscope, which are harder to see. So I'm going to give you a little cartoon version like this. You have access to this on your tasks to complete list. And all I'm going to ask you to do now is, this is now on tasks to complete. We're on step number 4, healthy versus cancerous cells. There's a link right there to the same image of a healthy and cancerous cell. Click on that. I'm going to throw you into breakout rooms just for 3 minutes. And I want you to go down the labels, right? They have cytoplasm, nucleus, chromatin, and nucleolus labeled. And notice what's different, right? What do you notice about the shape? What do you notice about how many there are in each cell? Discuss that, and we'll come back together to share. Okay, just 3 minutes. Breakout rooms are open. Go for it. Step number 4. All right. Sophia, what's something that stood out to you and whoever you were discussing it with?
There's like multiple nuclei, I guess, in cancerous cells.
Yeah, that's tricky to see because in those blue ones, it's hard to tell. But yeah, you're right. There are actually 2 of those dark nuclei inside a single one, which is kind of interesting. Anthony, what's something you and your partner noticed?
Joy and I noticed that like the membrane was like wrinkly in the cancerous one, and in the healthy one it was nice and round.
Nice. Yeah, and that tells you something about the cytoplasm in particular, right? That these healthy cells have lots of cytoplasm. They're all swollen up, and yeah, these other ones are kind of crinkled, right? They're not really paying much attention to the health of the cell itself. Iva, what was something you and your partner noticed?
Yeah, we just noticed how in the healthy one there's more of a round shape, and in the cancerous one, it doesn't seem like anything has too much of a definite shape.
Yeah, they kind of look like dried leaves almost, right? Like not healthy looking cells at all. So great. So, and again, this might seem kind of silly, but this is literally what a lot of doctors are doing during a biopsy is they're studying this underneath a microscope and they're literally looking for cells that look like they're in this unhealthy form. Oops. Okay, I want to go back to my slides just to show you guys here. Sorry, having trouble connecting. There we go. All right, so you definitely highlighted that the cytoplasm in particular, there's a lot of cytoplasm in a healthy cell, and in a cancerous cell, it's definitely reduced. Cancer cells aren't really looking to build organelles and keep liquids in, right? And this is one reason why they're pretty vulnerable to things like exposure to radiation and to chemotherapy. They're just unhealthy cells, and so they are pretty easy to kill off. The nucleus, a lot of you might notice that there are multiple nuclei inside the cancerous cells and only single ones. And again, it's because these cancerous cells are just uncontrollably dividing, right? They're constantly copying, copying, copying. And so it's not a surprise that some of them end up with multiple nuclei. It's the same thing. The chromatin is really, really dark. Again, there's so much DNA that they've made. They're just copying it constantly in order to get ready to divide. And they have multiple, it's the nucleolus, right? There's multiple large nucleoli, which also play a role in creating proteins and creating all that DNA. So the ultimate thing to recognize is that the cancer cells are pretty distinguishable and they're not very healthy looking. Okay, so let's go into what's going on here on a genetic level. There are check mechanisms. I'm not going to go into every detail about cell division because that would take a whole other lesson, but the point is that early on in cell division, there are checkpoints that should be occurring. And any kind of damage, if there's ever mutated DNA, it will either stop dividing until the DNA has been fixed or mended, or the cell will destroy itself through what's called apoptosis, which is essentially self-destruction, right? So these checkpoints are the key thing. You actually develop cancer cells on almost a daily basis. I know it's scary to think, but cancer pops up and a cancerous cell will pop up in you almost every day, but your cells recognize it. The cell either destroys itself or your immune system takes care of it. But every once in a while, it gets by all of those mechanisms and then begins to develop into a tumor. So mutations in these certain genes, these control genes, what can drive cancer to occur. So again, this is the thing. Normal cells, they obey strict rules. And when cancers are the result of misbehavior, when these control mechanisms aren't working. So there's two I want you to be familiar with. The first gene is called a tumor suppressor gene. And it's exactly what it sounds like, right? This is something that tries to prevent tumors from forming by blocking if there's a mutated, if that's mutated, then there's no sort of checkpoint. There's this first checkpoint that's been lost. So the way I want you to think about the tumor suppressor gene is think of it as a stop mechanism, right? That if there is a mutation in the DNA, if there's something wrong with the cell, like it's going to develop into a cancerous cell, then the tumor suppressor gene essentially just is like a big stop sign that says no more cell division until this DNA has been fixed. So think of it as the stop mechanism that checks the cell to make sure all the DNA is okay before cell division moves forward. That's the simplest way I can put it. Tumor suppressor genes are the stopping mechanism. They're like the brakes, right? They won't let the cell develop out of control, and they make sure the DNA is healthy. The next control mechanism are called proto-oncogenes, which I know sound kind of intimidating, but again, I'll try to keep this simple. Proto-oncogenes are sort of the opposite, right? Think of this as the gas pedal in the car. So these are the go mechanisms, right? If a proto-oncogene will essentially check the DNA inside of a dividing cell, and if all the DNA is good, then it says go, you may continue to divide. But if it doesn't, if there's mutations in the DNA, if it looks like it's going to be a cancerous cell, then that go mechanism, that go signal doesn't get delivered. And so that's one way of controlling this. The way that this breaks down is these can mutate into what are called oncogenes, which are essentially stuck in the go mode. It's essentially like keeping your foot slammed down on the gas the entire time. And so no matter what might be wrong with the cell, it just keeps saying, okay, divide, 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 and just keep going. And that's cancer. That's uncontrolled cell growth. So there's a little video I've made and an activity I want you to do to try to explore this, because I know it's a little confusing. Those slides are also available at the very end of the tasks list. So step number 6, you can look at those same slides if you want to open those up and scroll to the end. It might help you with that activity, but I'm going to give you the remaining time we've got to work on the mitotic cell division role play. This is step number 5. You're going to be gathering some things to represent cells and DNA and basically trying to act out what happens when these control mechanisms don't work. I'll give you 15 minutes to do this, and I'll be here listening if you need help on any of it. So just click on that assignment right there, mitotic cell division role play activity. It'll take you to an assignment that looks like this. I'll share my screen for 2 seconds here. And as usual, I have what you'll need listed, and then I have written instructions, but I've also made a little demonstration video that you can watch. And again, you'll be posting a video to Flipgrid, or if it doesn't work, just email the video to me. So 15 minutes to give that a go. And then we'll come back together to wrap things up. I'll be here listening if you need help. Is it making a little bit of sense to people? I know that I went through that quickly, but I would just think of, again, these are checkpoints to make sure that a cell is healthy before it goes through cell division in a controlled way. And the tumor suppressor genes are like the stopping mechanism, like, whoa, this is not a healthy cell, stop the division. The oncogenes are the go mechanism, like everything looks good, go ahead and divide. And so when those are malfunctioning, cell growth just occurs out of control, regardless of whether there's DNA damage or damage to the cell. Homework is at the bottom of the tasks to complete list. Please fill in the L column in the KWL. So what did you learn from today, going through the slides? You need to make sure you're posting a video of your cell division activity. I saw one posted, so try to finish that up. And then there is a little bit of reading I'd like you to do again. I have scans from the same Hall textbook. It's actually anatomy and physiology textbook, but I've snatched all the pages where cancer has been mentioned. And so you're gonna do a short reading about skin cancers, lung cancer, and there's the usual notes and a little reading reflection. Questions on that? All right. Thank you very much, kids. Have a good day. I will see you on Thursday because there's no school on Wednesday. So see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
Mr. Haight?
Yeah.
I